Hello and welcome to the Daily Debrief with the War Room Esports. Today we are going to be having a slightly different episode. We're going to be covering two series today. We'll be talking about the SKT versus RNG series and also the ROX versus EDG series. So with us we have a special guest who's joined us for the second time. We have Kelsey Moser from the Score Esports. Say hi, Kelsey.
Hello, everyone.
Excellent stuff. So,
are you enjoying the Chicago food? Because I know you love Chicago food.
Oh, yeah. How is Chicago?
Food that is not pizza in Chicago, just in case everyone is confused, because that's literally the only thing that's on anyone's timeline ever. So
big ass deep dish pizza. How's your press room? I saw you guys got set up in a tent.
Yeah, it was pretty excellent. We were like that in Paris last year too. So I was pretty sure when I saw it going up outside that it was going to be a tent. Yes, excellent. It's a little cold, but it's mostly okay.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay, so obviously we have with me the two regular co-hosts of the show. We have Shakarez from LOL King. Say hi, Shaka.
What's up?
And Nasa from Misfits. Say hi, Nasa.
Hello, let's talk about some Chinese League of Legends today.
Also Korean. We have 50-50 split.
Korean, yeah.
So some Korean League of Legends. Yes. So obviously we've had two series. Unfortunately for China, not successful in either. But we can't exactly talk about the success of the West right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. We're not also not doing too well. So yeah, let's just talk about this series in general. So just so everyone's aware, we're not going to be breaking down as many clips, or in fact any clips today. This is going to kind of be more of an open discussion, and we'll kind of just go for a free flow thing for a bit. So let's start off with the SKT versus RNG games. So what were your initial thoughts of the kind of the overall series, Kelsey?
Well, I was pretty sure it was going to be a 3-0, and it wasn't. I think one of the big reasons it was 3-0, if I remember correctly, it just had a lot to do with the overall, the
draft.
Duke had a really weird series. I want to say was a big factor. The Sidelands just kind of won on their own. Initially, I thought that the Jin Zyra lane should actually beat the Ezreal Karma lane, but I think it's fairly even, just because Zyra is like really obnoxious. But that won really hard, and then top just kind of gave up. I don't know.
Yeah.
He got solo killed early with the minion wave, so basically all Xiaohu had to do was stay relevant and then find good flanks, and they had a really good lane assignment in that game, so it was actually like Royal had some semblance of macro play in the mid game.
Yep.
Then they got a couple of good drakes.
Yeah, of course.
Just a few.
Because then in the mid game, RNG started to lose. Some steam.
The Royal luck, yeah.
Yeah, and even the Poppy she was like 30 CS down or something, and she managed to even up the CS because Jace messed up. At one point, Jace, he started a TP, and then he cancelled it after pushing a bottom wave. And so he had to back and not stay bottom lane and go straight to Baron and try to make a play around Baron so that SKT didn't try anything around Baron or didn't make a TP play with Poppy basically with the TP down from Jace.
In general, the wave control though from Royal is just really bad. So I think that it's easy to play catch up for tops, and I don't think it was a specific play necessarily. Royal in general are just really bad at late game plays, and I wasn't sure who was saying it on broadcast, but someone made a comment about how Royal are good at coming back in team fights, which is actually completely false. I don't think they had any kind of miraculous comeback their entire season. It was usually just they averaged, I think, the highest gold lead of any team internationally at 15 minutes. It was like 100 over TSM or something. And they would just choke you out with strong lanes, and that was it. So it's basically what happened that game as well.
I mean, I actually was pretty impressed with at least in game one, I think their vision game was actually pretty good. They were choking out SKT's vision quite a lot. Like there was probably like good 10 minutes where SKT didn't have any vision past the river. And it was just like really good discipline from him. I mean, I don't think SKT played particularly well in the first game, but I think, like at least credit where credit's due. Like RNG seems to be, I mean, like Mata seems to be pretty on the ball with regards to vision, which obviously is something he's not lost. Although I don't know, like whenever I get like an opinion on Mata, it kind of like people. I talk to people, like particularly you, and I'm like, okay, this is how I understand Mata to be as a player, and they're like, no, that's just completely not how Mata is at all. So I don't even know how Mata is. Like on the one hand, like I remember Mata as being this really great lane player, but now it's like it turns out that like Mata's not actually that good in lane at all. And he like wins a lot of these, he loses a lot of the matchups that I assume he should win. And I'm like, okay, great, he's this like really good vision player, and this seems to be true. What's your take on Mata in terms of in terms of these things?
I mean, he always is a very quantity over quality vision control player still, I think. So he will always place a lot of wards. Royal in general, I think their playoffs they place more wards than any of the other Worlds teams as well.
Yeah.
Xiaohu places a lot of wards also. I think the big thing with Royal for me going from spring to summer was the fact that they became a much more fragmented, like Cloud9esque play for lane team, when in spring they were much more about Xiaohu, MLXG, and Mata like meeting up for roams.
Sure.
In the early game, and so it's just for me, Xiaohu is so much more awkward when you force him to just play lane phase, but he's pretty decent at understanding where to place vision on the map and where to position on the map.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about RNG, like particularly in spring, and I referenced that spring by referencing their MSI performance. I actually didn't really watch much of RNG in spring, but I know one of the things I did notice in at least in the MSI performance, and I don't know if you think that was a good representation of how they were in spring, but I know definitely like Lupa looked a lot more coordinated with his team in terms of like his TP plays in MSI than he did this year at Worlds. Like I actually wasn't that impressed with Lupa's TP play, and that's always been something that Lupa's been really good at as a player. Like back in his time as Samsung White, he was, like I think the storyline at the time in season 4 was that like Save was considered like kind of the default best top laner, but Lupa was was like just the guy to go for TPs. And there was a question about maybe he was just like being controlled by Mata, and there was that kind of storyline. But I think that maybe there is some merit to that, but definitely I think that Lupa for me, well, he had an interesting lane performance against Duke, though I think partially that was maybe Duke inting a bit. He was really kind of disappointing from a kind of a TP play perspective, which is always something I've associated with Lupa. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I don't think he's had the best TP plays even in spring. I think his MSI performance was just really high over performance. I know Spawn is extremely high on Looper in general, but I'm not. So I guess it depends on who you talk to. I think that there's kind of a storyline where he ended up getting less gank attention. I don't even necessarily think that's true. I just think that Malashango or MLXG ended up spending less attention in general. He became more Meteos-like. Like there was less fixation on what lanes to gank or less communication between the lanes. He just kind of ineffectively power farms now, which is really bizarre. Because his pathing is really inefficient still. So it's I don't think that storyline necessarily fits. It's just that Looper before, like RNG have always had a problem with like split pressure and knowing when Looper should split push and when he should group with the team and when he should TP and things like this. So I don't necessarily even think the Looper factor has been that different for RNG so much as the synergy between Mata and the Chinese players.
On the topic of Looper, I feel like he was really overhyped by some of the casters because he won lane in playoffs. When if you look at the picks, he always got like the counter pick, like the favorable lane matchup, which is supposed to be like 10 or 20 or not 20. I don't think he was ever 20 CS up, but he was always like some decent CS up ahead of the opponents he faced, and the opponents he faced weren't really that great, top laners. And like I said, he always got like the counter matchup in the majority of his games, from the games that I watched. And so I think that's what led to a bit of like, oh, he's just left on the top lane by his team, and I feel like I don't know. I didn't see that perspective the same way that they did.
So, what was your take on SKT? How do you think they played in terms of the series? I mean, I think they pretty much played to what everyone expected them to, within like certain kind of boundaries. What was your take on SKT?
Yeah, I think what SKT did was they had above average wave control. They had above average. I think it was just like mildly above average everything. They had really strong mid control. Where I saw the games kind of altering was in games 2 and game 3. They had much stronger mid matchup. Yeah. Well, not necessarily much stronger mid matchup, but I don't know. I'm fairly confident in saying that. At least the Varus game was a mid pick that will push out better.
Yeah.
And the Syndra isn't necessarily going to like Vlad is considered kind of a Syndra counter, but you still have to ramp up with that. Mm-hmm. So it was very effective to push out the lane and kind of prevent Xiaohu from finding ways to be effective in that sense, and then the lanes could just snowball from mid. And you saw some of the ineffective roams, especially in game 4, and RNG actually started out with a lead again, but Xiaohu went top, was unable to find anything, and while he was backing, Faker was able to push out and then go bot and completely change the flow of the game. So I think that it was just like Faker had slightly better timing and slightly better coordination with his other lanes overall, which was a really big factor for me, especially since I don't think the jungle matchup was that huge in this series.
Sure. So. Shaka, what were your thoughts on SKT in terms of how they played overall? Did they meet your expectations?
I mean, more or less. I wasn't expecting them to just go into the series and drop game 1. I was more so expecting something like what happened yesterday between EDG and ROX, where EDG get a win in the 3rd game after ROX is 2-0 up. I was more so expecting something like that if RNG would actually take a game. That said, game 2, I really game 2 was actually one of my favorite games so far this tournament, because SKT just showed how to play a really risky comp in my mind. It needs to be very well executed, right? You need to be able to disengage perfectly and then re-engage, and that's something that SKT does really well, and it's always so much fun to see. So the way they set up the Jhin Varus comp with the Zyra to disengage for them was really cool to see, and I think it's a composition that not many other teams can probably run it, because one little mistake and you let the other team back into the game, right? And then Kelsey did mention that RNG went for the Vlad against the Syndra matchup, which is kind of a counter because the thing is, while Vladimir can stay in lane and survive against Syndra, it just gives Faker too much breathing room and too much space to do whatever he wants. And I think that's against a player like Faker, you should, even if you get the Vlad, I don't think it's a good idea to give him so much. It's a bit like Bjergsen. I don't think you should give him either of those players too much attention, too much freedom in the mid lane, so they can push up, roam, and do all those things. Because if you enable those players, they will carry a game. So overall, not surprised by the result, but yeah, I was surprised that they came into game 1 losing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of agree with your point about game 2 being a really interesting game. Like, I was particularly interested to see how RNG would deal with SKT's draft, because the way I saw RNG's draft is that they had like a lot of the tools they needed to kind of really cause problems for SKT, because they had the Olaf versus the Zac, and like the Olaf's always going to take that early lead because that's what kind of Olaf does. At least that's what we've been seeing in this tournament. And like the problem, so like you can kind of assume that Olaf's kind of gonna get rolling, and he has that Karma as well to help kind of speed him up a bit. And I look at SKT's backline, and it's like Jhin, Zyra, Varus, and all three of those are really like low mobility, and it kind of just comes down to, can they kill the Olaf before he kills them? And I think this there was always that kind of, I really like this these kind of composition matchups where you have like one team's really good at like one thing, and the other team like has a counter or an answer, and it just comes down to, can they execute, And I think that the way that the early game went, like SKT coming up, they were like 5-0 at like 6 minutes or something. It was such a one-set early game. It was like at that point it's over for RNG. So yeah, I think it was a really interesting game. Nasa, what were your thoughts on this series, specifically SKT?
I'm really just interested in like how strong is SKT compared to the other two Korean teams, because I feel like SKT, they just slowly win the game. Even if they get like a good early lead, they always seem in control. They always seem like they know what they're doing and they're comfortable during the game, but they always take their time closing the game, basically. And that's not kind of how ROX and Samsung play. Like when those two teams have a lead, they just go all in, they go ham to try like to create fights, Baron plays, Baron baits, etc. So I'm just super interested next week and the week after to just see all these Korean teams play each other.
I kind of like that point that you made about SKT taking it slow, because I think this is kind of the throwback to, the old storylines about the Korean teams, about how they're slow but very methodical, very patient, very safe. They don't take any risks, and this was kind of the big thing that we saw with ROX Tigers this year. There was suddenly this really aggressive team. And I think that like SKT and to a degree like KT as well are kind of more of the old guard, Korean teams, and we're seeing these like new kids come up, like the ROX Tigers, your Samsung Galaxies. They're slightly more aggressive. Although I'm not even sure I would categorize Samsung Galaxy as one of the more aggressive teams. Definitely ROX Tigers are. And
in this tournament, they've had they've had some really quick games.
Oh sure, yeah, they've had some games where they've snowballed really cleanly. But I don't think I would consider them like in the same realm of that, when you talk about aggression, you talk about your ROX Tigers. In terms of early game, you talk about like your TSM, COG. If they get a good comp, was doing some interesting things.
My point
could be
wasn't really towards
team.
Like aggression. It was more like
how good are they?
How fast are they at closing? Basically, and you can maybe say that SKT faced opponents that better understood how to stall a game. Have better vision, etc.
Do we really think that like C9 and Flash Wolves and IMA are really good at stalling games? I think across the board they were pretty poor teams.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that like SKT took forever to, for example, close a game against IMA because of their comp. Like that's as an example.
Sure.
And not so much IMA being like good at stalling. In my
Kelsey,
opinion.
what's your take on this?
I mean,
take so long time to close theory.
I think IMA are good at stalling, but I don't necessarily think the other teams are. And IMA are only good at stalling because I don't know. Other teams just do dumb shit against them, so I don't even think.
I mean,
even think that's something you can credit that with them. Royal are not good at stalling. They're good at losing very quickly, so it's more concerning. It's more concerning.
It is an SKT thing. It is like
it's. Yeah, it's more concerning to me for SKT that they are slow to close, but I do think they're very controlled when even if like we could call it slow, right? It's not in a way that you necessarily feel like they're leaving a lot of openings for other teams to get back into the game.
Yeah.
Like another example is H2K. You know, you wouldn't put them in the same, the same You don't compare them too similarly. They're a bit different about how the games go in the late game, how they play in the mid late game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or would you just both teams are the same?
I mean, for me, I am still not sure how I think HDK plays. Like I've got a pretty good idea about how I think SKT plays, but I still don't know how HDK plays. What we saw was some more best of ones. I'd like to see them in a best of 5 before I really kind of I'm done with making these like rash statements about teams. So
I can tell you how H2K play.
Yeah.
Hit us.
Oh gosh. H2K play by what they want is they want an extended laning phase, okay? And they want to be able to get like small leads in the laning phase in that way. They want to be able to get to a point where if they make atrocious Baron calls, it's okay. And to just like slowly close out through the lanes. I don't think H2K are necessarily that good at making cross-map decisions and making trades on one side of the map to the other because there are certain members of the team that seem unwilling to give up advantages on one side to get other advantages on the other. No names.
No need.
I'm sure you can figure it out based on like how they play, and that's where my observations comes from. Is it seems to be like based on Forgiven's comments and how he appears to play in game that he doesn't necessarily want to make a lot of cross-map trades. So I think that that's a difficulty for them. I also think they're a kind of very momentum-based team, and I hate using that word, but it's like if one member of a team is doing if multiple members of the team is doing well, that will reinforce it. But if one person starts to kind of play poorly, it starts to unravel a bit for them. So it's one of those weird situations where everyone on the team has to be on their game that day. So H2K are really weird.
Yeah.
So they can. Yeah. Go ahead.
I can usually predict how like HDK is going to go like once the game has started because it kind of all depends on their picks, but like I mean the standard HDK game is they'll whichever side lane is winning or like whichever kind of lane is winning, they'll take that tower and then they'll just their game plan is always just like I mean I'll use bottom lane as an example because that's usually the first tower that goes down because they pick really aggressive bottom lanes. And what usually happens is they'll like push down bottom tower and then they'll swap and then they'll push down top tower and then they'll group in and they'll push down the third tower and that's like 95% of the time that's HTK's game plan is they just go all in on the bottom tower. They just like put like super aggressive bottom lane. They take the tower down and as soon as that goes down they'll instantly swap and then they'll go top and they'll put the dual lane in top and then they'll push that tower down and then they'll group mid and then they'll just push that tower down and that seems to be like the only way they play laning phase. And then like Yankos will do his thing and he'll like gank lanes and stuff, but that seems to be like the kind of default way that HDK plays in a laning phase. It's just like the bit where I struggle to kind of categorize HDK is defining them as an aggressive team or as a slow team or as a macro team because I think I don't know how I would categorize this team. They just kind of play like a very systematic team, but usually when I use the word systematic, I mean like they have a good understanding of which objectives to go to, but I'm not 100% sure I want to commit to that statement with HDK.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they are completely on board with which objectives they want to commit to. I think something that's been a good development for them, starting with their third place match, and we've seen it a little bit throughout the tournament, is that they're prioritizing having more synergy between mid and jungle and working through the mid game. But in order to do that, you have to prioritize getting a strong bot lane matchup for forgiven, which is why like the first pick Caitlyn has become really huge, and this is something that we can talk about in the next series as well.
So let's go back to SKT RNG and Nasser. I kind of want to get your thoughts on how do you feel RNG played in this game, because we've not had your thoughts on this yet.
Like, the series, basically echo all of your thoughts on RNG. I expected 3-0 in this series. Unfortunately, SKT had kind of a weak laning phase draft, and Duke went a bit XD. I actually think that if RNG didn't have 2 mountains, that SKT, I would have put like good money on SKT being able to come back fully and win that game, the game 1. But yeah, I think my only question is like on SKT's how is their game going to match up versus ROX's game, and if they do beat ROX, how are they going to match up versus Samsung? Because we still have to remember that this is the same SKT that end up 3rd in the playoffs for the LCK, and like they've had close games with a lot of different LCK teams, so I don't think they are absolutely the best team so far from the Koreans. I feel like all 3 Korean teams might actually be on even footing or close to even footing, and we'll end up seeing like who is like ahead of everyone, or even if it ends up being 3-2 all around in the semis and final.
Yeah.
So yeah, the one thing for me is just how much agency they get out of the mid lane, which is going to be different from the other 2 teams, which I think have done a lot better in coordinating their jungle with their lanes. I think it's much more about Faker opening up the map, which isn't always necessarily reliable. Really tunnel on play for the lane. So that's my big concern for SKT against ROX and Samsung.
Do you think that Faker, the way he's playing right now, is not the way you should be playing as a mid laner in this meta? Do you think he has flaws?
I think right now he's playing. I think he's right now playing it very well, and it's just that he's effectively. Well, he does have flaws in terms of if he does tunnel on the laning phase, but for the most part, how he's been playing in this tournament has been really strong.
Yeah, actually, versus RNG,
it's more
to do with.
Yeah, it's more to do with the sync of the jungler with the lanes than, I guess, the mid lane with the side lanes.
Sure.
Okay.
So let's use this opportunity to, while we're talking about kind of SKT versus ROX Tigers, and let's move into the ROX Tigers EDG game. So again, I'm gonna kind of open it to you again, Kelsey, and just kind of give us what your thoughts were for this series overall, because I mean a lot of people are kind of heralding this as like the really disappointing series from EDG, but I mean given the substitution in the top lane, and I don't know, like what were you expecting to see here? Did you think that EDG could take this?
I didn't think EDG could take this. I thought it would be 3-1 because I thought Tigers would be worse based on their group stage.
Sure.
And instead we just got a Tigers troll, so it was whatever. But I think the top lane, I didn't think the top lane would matter that much. To me, I don't even know if I can say this, but to me the top lane change was like yes, it's very possible that something happened to Mouse's family, and in that case, I'm very sorry.
Oh, you think there's a conspiracy?
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I just think I know China.
Oh, God.
So to me, this was more of a sign that there was some sort of issue with confidence for the team than it was necessarily for that Cora 1 and Mouse as players being interchangeable to an extent. Like, I actually kind of felt like Cora 1 not playing very seriously for a year would be basically the same as Mouse.
Honestly, if you take away the nameplate, I would have just told you that was Mouse.
Yeah, I actually thought he played better.
Yeah, I thought he was okay.
I mean, Mouse is a better really a game than any of Cora's games, for example.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mouse snowballed really hard on a free laning phase, but like Korra 1 was snowball like Korra, like people were inside Korra 1's lane like from the beginning, like all the games. Like he was having no top laner can deal. Like I don't care who you are. Like when you get camped that hard, you can't carry. Like it's on the other side of the map to do something with the fact that like all the pressure is being put there. You know.
Like ROX gave them gave Korra a really good welcoming party. Like legit, like the first game. They were top like so many times. Holy shit. It was like
that was historically Korra 1's strength, was that he was good at evading ganks and taking a lot of top pressure on his own. But the problem is that if you don't, that's not something you can say is sustainable, right? For a long period of time for any player. And he was doing that really well, and that's part of why their MSI run was so good, is because, I mean, you had the ridiculous highlight clips of like 3 people on his lane, and he'd kill one of them and make it out.
Yeah.
Well, he did that this series, you know, a couple of times.
So I think that it's an issue for EDG, and I think historically EDG have just shown that they're really bad at developing top laners, which is part of why they had Ziv like physically in Chicago training with Korra 1 and Mouse.
Ziv was there, really?
Yeah, Ziv was training with the top laners because I think they acknowledged that, like, as an organization.
Yeah.
They should just get Ziv for next season.
This is the question I had, like, for EDG, is it them not being able to develop or find talent, or is there are there no good top laners from solo queue or from like the lower divisions?
I think there are a few complicated things about Chinese scouting. One is that as soon as you have like a talented player, someone just signs him, or a high-ranked player, someone will just sign him to maybe like a crummy LSPL team or something, and then that contract is really hard to get the player out of in a lot of situations. So you
can't go through the TSM route and just take the challenger player from a team.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to just kind of grab a player most of the time. A lot of times you can find organizations will pay buyouts and things like this, but it's a little bit rare, which is part of why ClearLove and FCZF leaving WE was such a big deal. So it's like it's almost like you don't leave your team, right? It's a loyalty thing to an extent. And
so why is Uzi running around to like every team in China then?
I mean, he's just considered like a valuable player, right? So he's kind of weird because everyone wants to play with UZI, even though he literally ruins every team he touches. But
so he's Chinese Broken Shard then.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Memes.
But yeah, for UZI, because his initial buyout from OMG was ridiculous, but because he is so valuable, he actually gets like really high salary and really high pay for a short period of time, right? So that makes UZI's contract situation kind of unique. In fact, allegedly the reason why he went back to Royal is because Royal were interested in him when he was on QG, and QG were kind of like, I don't know if we can afford him for another split. So that's one of the discussions that kind of take place in the background. But it's so UZI is kind of unique, but that's a separate topic of conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
So basically the top lane, the talent issue is basically solo queue players get snapped up by lower tier teams, either from LPL or LPL. And it's basically it'll just have to depend on EDG being able to snap some of these guys before others do,
and also just be able to develop the talent that they have. I think part of the reason why Mouse is a player that people in EDG look at favorably, he was originally a mid lane main. They've tried to run him as support. They tried to run him as top for I guess a year and a half now, and he has a very good attitude, right? So they want to be able to develop him into some kind of player, but it's not working out for them. So,
you think they'll keep him for next year? Or do you think they'll look for a roster change in the top lane?
I think there will probably be a roster change. It's very likely.
Sure.
I'm not sure about Deft. Deft is talking about maybe leaving, but honestly, with Deft, it's like he could join a Korean team.
Yeah.
But would it be a Korean team that will help him win Worlds, which is what he wants to do, right? Like, what Korean team will pick up Deft?
Well, I mean, I think I don't see a reason why. I mean, let's say Samsung go out in like the semis or the finals or whatever. You know, Samsung might look to pick him up because I mean they've got a great team, and I think while Ruler has had like a great showing relative to what his expectations were, I think in terms of raw talent, he's not even close to what Def's at. You know, also there's like KT as well. Arrow's been around for a fair while. I would put Deft above Arrow. So you know, in terms of like two elite teams, these are two teams that I could see Deft joining if those teams were willing to drop their ADs for him. I don't necessarily see why they would, because there's always that issue with like communication and synergy and you know, kind of like that team feel, and you don't know how like bringing in a new player will kind of disrupt that. But I definitely can see if Deft is really willing to join a team and people are interested in him, there are teams that he could go to that would make sense to put Deft in those teams. You know, and I think KT and Samsung are two kind of prime.
I want to say Samsung would stick with Ruler because it was his rookie season. I also think that
I would expect that.
That even though Deft is like a Korean player who really is invested in winning Worlds, there's a slight stigma to players who have gone to China within Korea,
Really?
and being interested in them again. But I don't know how it would work out. I also think KT have a very good relationship with like the way Arrow has worked for them, the way he's worked on his team, and in a lot of ways, like if you look at some of the top Korean teams, they focus a lot of attention towards top. So there's this one criticism of Korean bottom lanes that I've talked to Chinese journalists with about that they seem to have, is that people will say things like Prey and Gorilla don't seem very good, but that's because fundamentally the way that Chinese and Korean teams seem to be set up is very different. You have much more top priority in Korea, so the Chinese the bottom lanes will play much more reserved, whereas in China the bottom lanes will play like full aggro, and the tops don't, like they're junglers on the bottom side of the map. So it's a different types of dynamic, and if you're not aware of these factors, like you'll see these differently. And the way that Deft has started to play in China, I think, is different from the way that he would necessarily slot into a team like Samsung or a team like KT.
Sure. So let's talk about you know, the other big player in EDG that obviously needs to be brought up. So, and that is of course ClearLove, who you know has had, I think it's fair to say, another World's performance. I think it's like another World's performance that is below the expectations that we have of a player of the caliber of ClearLove.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, I've of all the Chinese players, I follow ClearLove the most. Not including the Korean players that moved to China, but of all the Chinese players, I follow ClearLove the most. And like, you know, I've seen like some of the performances that like you know, you look at it and you think, holy shit, this guy is the real deal. You know, this guy is the full package. And then, you know, like sometimes he has these like weird performances and stuff. So I mean, like, but I want your take on this. Like, what is the deal with ClearLove?
I did end up writing an article about this just last night. I'll probably do some more stuff, whatever. Because, gosh, what does Kelsey do? She writes about ClearLove. It's literally her entire existence.
She's the reason ClearLove got overrated in the West.
Yeah, clearly.
It's not me all over
but
again.
It's clearly all my fault. But I think it's, when you look at ClearLove, the things he gets praised for are going to be his pathing decisions in the early game, right? It's primarily the thing that people will praise him for.
Yeah, he's very efficient, and well, he can be. He can be very efficient. He's also very good mechanically.
But it's like, for example, you could even in his terrible game, you could see some of those instances because he started as the Lee Sin, he left the blue up, he knew that Peanut would go and invade the blue, so in response, he went and he took the wolves and the Gromp from Peanut's side of the jungle, so that when Peanut backed and went back, like it disrupted his power farming as Olaf. Then they met up in the blue side area, like ClearLove baited with the Gromp several times. And it was just like, so these types of things are things that ClearLove has known for. The problem is that I think this is like the first Worlds. I will say this is the first Worlds where I feel like he really choked. And the reason why I feel like this is the first Worlds where he really choked and not the other Worlds is because a lot of his play was just extremely typical in previous Worlds of his domestic showings. He was not a good jungler until Season 5, for example.
Mm-hmm.
He was always like extremely good at team fighting. Season 5, he had huge...
That meme.
Yeah. Season 5, he had huge issues with playing around top, and the meta kind of demanded that he play around top, and he just like would never sync up with his top laner very well. The timing was off. He would come to the lane when his top laner was like level 5 as a Fiora, or it just really weird stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily say he underperformed so much as performed like to that particular flaw that he had. This year, he worked on a lot of his issues. He learned to play Elise and Nidalee, which were always champions he avoided. He worked really hard on getting better synergy with his lane and becoming like slightly less predictable in his pathing, and he focused much more on mid, things like this. But this Worlds, I think what was going on with the Chinese teams was they became obsessed with winning bot lane and then invading the jungle.
Sure.
And this is a mechanism for ClearLove that is very important, is that they will win the bot lane, then their support will roam. He'll put like shallow vision. ClearLove will play off of that shallow vision to deepen the vision in the invade. And they will work on that. And one of ClearLove's biggest flaws is that he doesn't necessarily do anything without information. So if his team isn't giving him information, then he won't necessarily make this proactive play. However, I can say all of this, and he still was terrible in other regards. Like mechanically, he broke down. There was the the over-committal to the bottom lane. I think they got really desperate because they were tunneling on winning bot. So for me, like, there were a lot of issues. And then on top of that, he also did choke, for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
he had some moments of stuff that I didn't expect seeing from ClearLove. Like, I clearly remember, like, this gank. I think it was last game, where he's on Lee Sin, he doesn't have ult, and he just tries forcefully to gank bot, and Peanut reads him like a book and gets the triple kill, right? And that's the game kind of just ends right after that. And it just seemed like it's a bit like what Kelsey is saying, where they played to get bot ahead, but it was at times so forced that it was very easy for the enemy team to read that. And we're talking about ROX, which is I'd say a fairly smart team and know how to react to where the enemy jungle is and know where he is. So it was like way too obvious at many times. So it made Peanut's job really easy. So I'm really disappointed, honestly, because I was expecting more from ClearLove, but yeah.
Okay, so do we think that ClearLove, does he compare to these Korean junglers that have been performing really well? Like, I think coming in we said ClearLove. I think most people said ClearLove was the best jungler in the world, outside of Score.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Fair enough.
So, but like after this Worlds and kind of after last year and maybe like the lack of international tournaments that we have, can we maybe say he's not as good as Peanut and Score, and he's kind of like a tier below them?
I think that you have to kind of say that he's not the best, right? You have to come to that conclusion because he's had great international showings, but not at Worlds, right? He's had IPL 5 was a really good showing for him. He had MSI, even more recent, was a good showing for him internationally. So he's had good international showings, but it's like Worlds itself is where, and it's almost like the idea that he will never go past round of 8 is finally getting to him, because he'll actually even talk about it a little bit. But I think so because of that in particular, you have to say he's not as good as those junglers, but I still think that based on, you can't just discount everything else that he's done and say that he's not a top jungler, if that makes sense.
So I actually did think that he was the best jungler at the tournament coming in based on the information we had, but it was largely to do because there were a couple of caveats, because there was a question about Peanut was obviously the big question, but for me it was like we just don't know enough about Peanut to be able to decisively say that he's going to be better than ClearLove. Like I would put like ClearLove's years of experience way above like Peanut's like 1 year of being on a good team. I mean, he was a Najin before, but not even full time, and then he kind of wasn't really doing much, and he looked good, but nothing compared to what he was doing on ROX, and he only played 2 best of 5s. One of them he'd lost, and one of them he'd won, and it was like in both of those series Peanut didn't look particularly good. Admittedly in the first series he was playing against, he was his first best of 5s, so we can give him a bit of a like a free ride from that. And the second best of 5 he was against Score, who my opinion is still even right now the best jungler in the world. I think even including Peanut's latest performance. So that was kind of why I put ClearLove at the top, because having seen his domestic performance in 2016 summer, like one of the things that I saw from from ClearLove that I thought was that kind of defines how I see him play is he's very deliberate. Everything he does is like it's intentional. He doesn't do anything on like a whim, and it's something that I see is that's in my opinion a very good trait for a jungler to have, because a lot of what they have to do needs to be thought out in advance, and they can't just act on instinct. I mean, you can look at like a really good example is like Sven Skaren in spring 2016. Very instinctive jungler, would be very inefficient in a lot of the way he would path. He would just kind of run around and try and be in lanes and stuff. And you see this a lot from like a lot of rookie junglers. You see this a lot from a lot of the Western junglers. They're very, very inefficient because they're very indecisive. But this is not how I see ClearLove playing. He's very intentional about the way he does everything. So this was why I thought ClearLove was going to be the best jungler coming into this tournament, because he had all the experience and he could play. He looked like he had a good champion pool. He has got all this experience. Mechanically, he's just as good as any other jungler. Maybe not Peanut. I would maybe give Peanut a slight edge on mechanics. But then we see the series and we see his worst performance here, and it's just like this was not the ClearLove I was expecting to get.
Yeah.
Honestly. And I think that's kind of like that's my very long-winded answer to Nas's question about like how does he compare to other junglers. So I think now in hindsight we have to start asking questions. Is there a mental issue there with him specifically at Worlds? And this is not something we've seen for Peanut. I think a lot of Peanut's things is mostly hubris and the fact that his team seems to be very cocky, so maybe he gets drawn into that. But we've clearly seen that when he's on, and he can perform. So there isn't a question about that with Peanut anymore, so I think that's why Peanut now gets kind of the edge on best jungler at Worlds. What's your thoughts on this, Shaka?
Yeah, more or less what you said. I was expecting him to come in as one of the best, if not the best junglers. People talk a lot about his. I think it was his Nidalee game where he he played a very different style where he farmed up and pressured a lot but didn't get many ganks off. And people criticized that game, but I think that game was fine. But I don't know, maybe there is a mental block that when he gets to the BO5 stage at Worlds, he just doesn't show up. I don't know, even against H2K.
It's not even the BF5. He wasn't like a superstar in the group stage.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, even against H2K, he didn't really show up. So, I don't know. It's really weird because you see ClearLove during regular season and he looks pretty good, and then it just looks like two distinct players. It's really hard to judge what the hell is going on there.
Okay, so I got one last question about EDG. So why didn't we see Pawn? What's your thoughts on why didn't we see Pawn, Kelsey? Is there a specific reason for this?
I think.
Was Kelsey frozen?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Kelsey's
I
frozen.
think Kelsey is frozen.
And I think. She's.
Oh, there we
I
go.
am sorry.
Okay,
So yeah, you can.
I'm good.
You're good.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
okay.
good now. So yeah, what's the lowdown on the Pawn issue? Is there a reason we didn't see Pawn?
Pawn is bad.
Whoa.
but
Okay. Well,
not
let's move on.
because Pawn is bad as a player, but because he practiced significantly less because of his back issues. So really, for me, when you saw Pawn play, like there are all these stories about him playing solo queue. Like Skara, because I'm in the press room with Skara and he works with the score, he goes on and on about like all the players he plays in solo queue, and Pawn has like gone really high in NA solo queue, and he's doing really well, and everyone talks about this. But my issue with Pawn is that he has a weird problem with knowing one thing, where to be on the map in the mid game, and like where he's positioning on the map. He'll just like push to the sideline almost perma, and he won't group. And then the other factor with Pawn is that he will make these like kind of solo queue mid lane plays, and they won't necessarily be effective, or they won't generate pressure the way that they used to. And I think another thing with ClearLove is he's very specific about the mid laners he plays with, and I don't think like Scout or Pawn were necessarily enabling him the same way that Messiah used to, or the same way Pawn did last year. So that was another big thing for me. And these are all like it's almost like ClearLove is a good jungler if he has this box checked, this box checked, this box checked, and this box checked.
Do you think he'd be good with Mata?
With Mata, sure, if Mata roamed. I think he's good with Mako when Mako roams. Like, I honestly think Mako is a huge reason why he had a really good summer season. And that's why I was super frustrated with, like, the Nami picks in EDG, because this is a very lane-focused choice, right? Mm-hmm. And in the Alistar games, I honestly think those were like EDG's best games, not just from Mako, but from the entire team, for very obvious reasons. And then, but I think the really interesting thing so for me, like, I feel like next year is going to be ClearLove's last year, because he's already said at the start of this year, I have 2 years probably, as long as I don't feel like I'm holding my team back, that I can still play. And for me, if we have one more year, like, put him with Shia, because Shia is a player that he's always played with in solo queue and everything like this. Like, even in boot camp, he was duoing with Shia, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, like, if there's one last year, that's what I'd like to see. And if ClearLove still can't do anything, then he's just done.
Which also means that that means they can get a Korean top, right?
Oh,
yeah, if they did that.
Shia is currently on WE, right?
Yeah. So it would be difficult, but that would be something. It's like, obviously he's wanted to play with Shia for a while, and it hasn't happened.
Just switch junglers and put Condi on EDG.
Actually, I have a quick, slightly off-topic question. What's the deal with? Could you get Taiwanese imports into China? Because obviously they speak the same language; they speak Mandarin. Yes. But obviously there's like political tension between China and Taiwan. Is that a factor at all? I actually have no idea.
I think that's a factor, because it's really complicated to talk about, and I don't want to do it injustice. But let's say, for example, that you're a team and you can choose between importing a Taiwanese player or a Korean player. Okay.
Sure.
And Taiwanese players don't take up slots usually.
Oh, they don't?
Really? Yeah, they don't. At least because there are LSPL teams with like 4 Taiwanese players on them. But and LSPL has the same restrictions as LPL. So if you import a Korean player, and this Korean player plays poorly, right, and you put the Korean player on your roster, then it's like saying no one can fault you for that, right? Because he's Korean. He was supposed to be good. That's fine.
Yeah, okay.
If you import a Taiwanese player and this Taiwanese player doesn't perform well, it's kind of like, because of the political tension existing, it's like, why didn't you just take a mainlander? Like, why is this player playing?
Oh.
And it's
I see.
so it opens you up to much more criticism, I think, if you choose a Taiwanese player. In the past, EDG have been more willing to take like Hong Kong players. They had a Taiwanese sub before, so it might be something they do, but I don't know. I just think EDG are terrible at playing at developing tops. But Ziv would be the kind of top laner
Yeah.
you'd want
Because they
love-
have the relationship with AHQ, don't they? Like
he has a
EDG and HQ.
similar role. Yeah. Mhm.
So maybe that could happen. I'd like to see that happen.
I'd
love to see Ziv.
I'd
and
love to
EDG.
see Ziv.
Like you could keep in my. I mean, I'm gonna in my really kind of shallow understanding of EDG in their current form. In my opinion, I think you could literally just put in Ziv and it'd be a much better team. Because Ziv can play that, I can like just play on my own style. You know, like you can do
But
that. Like we've seen it.
ClearLove
with him.
doesn't traditionally play for
agree.
top though.
No, but Ziv doesn't get played towards either.
Yeah.
But I agree with you to an extent, but I actually think the mid is a much bigger issue. I don't even think the mids are worse than the top. Obviously, Mouse is like the worst player on the team, but I think the mid thing is like the bigger issue, is in particular with opening up the map and everything else for the way that ClearLove is.
Particularly in this meta.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that too, in this meta as well. But just historically, if you look at ClearLove's performances, he's been most confident with certain mid laners playing at their peaks and things like this. So.
Sure.
I want to talk about like how would you evaluate LPL this year, and like compared to last year, and what do you think LPL needs to do to improve at least in international showings toward going into next season?
I think that I wrote a lot of articles about this last year, and most of the things are still accurate. Where it's become much more of a commercial industry in China. Esports has streaming drives so many things. There are so many content there's so much content and promotion. Like the reason why Cora One was even here was to do promotional content for EDG. There are so many videos of him doing like manager video. There's so many videos of him doing like manager duties, like going to the store and buying food for the team. He did this weird promotion in Shanghai where it's like if you bought this mouse, 1 in 10 would be hand delivered, or not 1 in 10, but like 10 were drawn, and you could have it hand delivered by Cora One. And the process of this was streamed, and then ClearLove streamed it and like commentated over it. It was very weird. But it's an incredibly commercial industry in terms of what esports has become in China, and so I think that this has made their existing infrastructural problems with the fact that they have incompetent people in management like even worse, especially because you're not seeing a turnover of pro players like you are in the West and in Korea who become part of the infrastructure. You're seeing them become streamers or do other like have their own clothing line or whatever else. So you're not seeing like the people who learn a lot from the system come in and coach, right? So I think that that's a big issue too, is that there just aren't a lot of good people in the behind the scenes roles. Like Aaron is literally maybe the only like there are good Korean coaches obviously, but there's a huge disconnect sometimes between Korean coach expectations and Chinese player expectations that make them pretty ineffective sometimes. So like it's really difficult to say.
I have a question. Is Rapid Star's opinion of like his general opinion of how people perceive him in China? Do people perceive him as a good coach, or does he get a lot of flack? Like,
I mean, I think Shaq is asking this because LS yesterday he had like a tweet reply to Thorin, and he basically told him that Rapstar had a bad reputation, or not like a bad like. A reputation that he's not that smart, maybe.
It was his reply to your tweet, Kelsey, where you criticized his draft.
Yeah,
that's all.
No, I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about like talking to Thorin about on Twitter about basically he's not perceived as very smart in Korea, and he resorted to like Reddit posts on like game analysis, and then he piggybacked to Korea with like friends and connections to get a job there.
I don't know necessarily about his reputation in Korea. I think that like my understanding with how Rapid Star works in EDG's infrastructure is he's primarily involved in the drafting side. I think he is respected by the Korean players on the team at least. So there's that factor going for him. I don't like his drafts. I've been public about how I don't like his drafts.
Yeah.
He obviously knows I don't like his drafts.
Yeah, he knows.
But I also think that it's not necessarily something you can purely blame him on, even the drafts, because if you look at EDG historically, they've had this weird obsession with drafting, like, losing lanes. They do it, and I think I can understand why they do this, is because if they have a strong jungle matchup and losing lanes, and you manage to get ahead anyway, then there's no way anyone can come back into the game. And it's a very, very like risky approach, but I think it's clear that
you can see the logic.
This is part of their mentality, and a lot of it is again just putting so much faith in ClearLove. Like there's just so many factors that ClearLove needs to perform for this team to do well, and the fact that he hasn't been at Worlds is a huge issue that's definitely going to hold him back.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch a bit on ROX versus EDG on the drafts, because we saw both game 1 and 2, EDG just giving away Caitlyn, Zyra, Aurelion Sol. And I get the idea. Like
I don't.
No. Let me finish.
I literally do not understand this at all.
I don't get why they're giving this up. Let me rephrase. I get the idea that Kelsey was explaining, but when she was talking about drafting losing lanes, and then like because you can if you just stay even, you'll just outscale, and there's no way the other team can come back. But that's when you're playing regionally. You're playing against one of the best teams in the world. And
okay, just quickly, Shaka. This doesn't even apply in game 2 because they give up the Caitlyn, Zyra, Aurelion Sol and then pick Hecarim.
Yes.
Which is not the better jungle matchup into Lee Sin. So just
yeah, for the viewers, for the viewers on your screen right now is the draft for game 1, and it's just
switch to game 2. Just please.
No, game one for me is funny because like ROX first pick Caitlyn, right? And EDG responds with Olaf Rise. Like they're blind picking Rise with there's so much shit still open.
Did we know that Kuro played Aurelion Sol before this? I think we did. We did know Kuro played Aurelion Sol.
Yeah. He did play. So that's game 1. And then if we look at game 2, if you just requested, it's like they're blue side now, EDG. They first pick
blind Rise and pick Hecarim.
They first pick the cannon. So
which is good. That's fine with
fine. That's fine.
I don't mind that so much.
So ROX takes Zyra Lee Sin once again, and then EDG takes Jhin.
Caitlyn's open.
Caitlyn is open. They take Jhin, and they take Blind Rise once again.
With Aurelion open.
The worst part is
and they start drafting towards a very heavy AP composition, because you already know that on support it's very likely that you'll see a Karma as a response to the Zyra, because it's really the only you can't really run like a tank. You'll just get shat on by Zyra, right? So you're expecting like a Nami or a Karma. So ROX just drafts Maokai, who is very good into heavy magic damage compositions. So it's here, the first pick cannon is fine, right? But then blind picking, right? What's the idea behind this Rise blind pick? Does Scout have champion pool issues, Kelsey? What's going on here?
We know he plays Aurelion Sol. We know he plays it because he plays it in game 3.
Yeah.
I don't know what was going on with the Aurelion Sol, because the ROX Tigers did it too, right? Where they blind Rise then EDG. But I don't know what I don't know what happened with that in particular, so I can't answer that question. I think that they slowly changed the priority to Caitlyn over the course of the game from Ezreal over the course of the series from Ezreal because Ezreal wasn't doing for them what they wanted it to, even though Ezreal has historically been Def's champion. I think again, I think Caitlyn's just a really strong pick right now because it has a strong laning phase and a strong late game. So, yeah. I mean, it has mid game weaknesses, obviously, but those don't seem as relevant.
It's slightly less so now. People are maxing Q again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. But yeah, you are right. She seems to be like the default OPAD, even more so than Jhin, and it's like, I don't know. Did we know that Scout played Aurelion Sol before this series?
I don't think he's played it internationally, but he's played it in solo queue.
Okay, yeah. So there's no like professional history.
Yeah, there's no professional.
Yeah. So I guess there's like maybe. I mean, I could maybe see them blinding the Rise in the first game, because what we did see actually is I could kind of see the justification for the Rise, because what we did see in the first game is that even though ROX Tigers picked the Aurelion Sol, Scout's actual laning phase in terms of 1v1 with the Kura, he actually had the pressure for a lot of the lane. Yeah. You know, apart from the initial level 1 shove, he actually had the pressure. You know, he was doing really a lot of good things, and actually he was pretty close to solo killing Kura a couple of times. I mean, I actually think that Kura's Aurelion Sol is pretty bad compared to some of the Aurelion Sols we've seen. I don't think it's that good.
Okay.
Like, I think he's, in terms of his mechanics on the champion, like he misses a lot of the skill shots, and the way he uses his Celestial Expansion, I think is really inefficient. There's a couple of times I could see, like, I can look at it, I'm just like, I know you can get the kill if you just stop the expansion, you just toggle it off, and he doesn't, and he leaves it on like the big ring, and he misses like kills for free, and I'm like, you clearly like do not have like a comfortable grasp on this champion. So I don't know, like I can kind of see the justification in game 1, but then in like game 2, at that point you really start having to adapt, and I don't know why they didn't. But
yeah, they showed zero adaptation from game 1 to 2 basically.
Yeah, I'm unsure why they didn't really adapt. I think they went for, like, I liked their actual, even though it's a joke, right? I actually like their composition in game 2 better than their composition in game 1, which to me was just really reliant on, I just don't like Ezreal Karma. Like, I know it's supposed to be really good and literally the best lane, but it doesn't do much for me outside of laning phase. I just don't like it.
Wait, but it's not Ezreal Karma, it's Jhin Karma, game 2.
But the game 1.
Oh, game 1.
I'm saying the reason why, like, the big reason why I liked game 2 straps better.
I don't mind Ezreal into like Jhin and stuff. I don't like it into Caitlyn because Caitlyn has too much shove, and especially don't like it to Caitlyn Zyra. And the thing is, he picked it into Caitlyn Zyra, and you know that they're gonna shove you in. And the problem is that Ezreal can, like, he's really good in like a trade bottom lane, you know. So if you're going to be like fighting the other AD, so if you're against, like, I don't know, like a Lucian or like a Jhin or something, somebody who doesn't just want to auto shove the wave, which is what Caitlyn Zyra wants to do. They just want to put the wave underneath the tower, and then that's where Ezreal can't deal with it because he has no wave clear. You know, he just has a best an auto reset in his Q, and it's like outside of that, like, there's nothing he can do. So I don't like, I completely agree with you, Kelsey. I think the Ezreal here is just like not a good choice, even in like just looking at it, you know. So I think I like that they switched to the Jhin, because at least the Jhin could do something when he's underneath the tower, I guess. I mean, I'm not really sure how I would do it. I just did not like EDG's draft strategy at all in this series. I think they really dropped the ball.
They were slow to adapt. They had weird issues with losing lanes, which they've almost always had, and they just played. They picked like weak jungle. They played weak laning matchups, weak jungle matchups, and they focused on it. It was so painfully EDG that I was just like tilting the entire time. So.
Yeah. Right. Let's unless anyone's got anything else they want to say about this, I want to move it on to some kind of predictions for later on in the tournament. So, is there anything else anyone wants to say about this series or any of the SKT RNG or the ROX EDG series?
ClearLove should go raise pigs. Spicy Chinese meme, haha.
You made that meme like 4 times now in various different formats.
No, actually 2.
Yeah. But okay, you lose points. I'm sorry, Shaka, you lose points. Anyway, so let's talk about. Okay, we'll start with tomorrow's matchup, and then we can talk a little bit about ROX versus SKT. So, Kelsey, I'm gonna start with you. As is the tradition.
Today's.
Oh, today's. Yes, today's. Sorry. Yes. So AHQ versus ANX. What's your thoughts going on to this? Is ANX a legit team? What's your thoughts on this?
I mean H2K.
H2K actually had the Miracle 4-0 run and made it out of the group, not HQ. No.
Oh yeah, H2K versus ANX. Sorry, is ANX? Yeah, my bad.
No, it was just joking. I think that it should be 3-0. I think though that it's one of those weird situations where if it isn't, they could actually lose it, because I do think mentally ANX is a much stronger team than H2K in terms of their resilience and their ability to stick out in a best of 5 and even adapt in a best of 5. Actually, I think, because when I was doing my power rankings going into it, I kept going back to my power rankings and why did I rate H2K so low? Like, I actually don't think they're that bad. And then I remembered that they're abysmal at adapting in a best of 5.
Also, H2K mid-game memes are actually a legit thing, and I'm still not convinced they're gone.
Yeah.
I think
no, I don't think they are. I think one thing that they've done better is, again, like reinforcing their jungle, playing better with mid-jungle synergy. That's improved their mid and given mid-game and given the mid-game momentum. I still think their Baron calls are terrible.
Yes.
But yeah, I think they're slightly better in mid-game. It's more like late game initiating team fights and then also Baron. But if they get the game that they want, which is setting up lanes and having this extended laning phase, like, it was really funny to me when it was like, I don't know how long in to the game at this point. Was it like 19 minutes in or something when Forgiven bought a Cole? And I was like, are you serious? And they still managed to extend the laning phase long enough. Yeah, it was like epic.
Yes.
Okay. But yes, I think that's exactly the kind of game they want to play. Is that kind of
Forgiven's the kind of guy to buy a call, get the reward, and buy a second call to get another reward. if there's any player that would do that, it would probably be Forgiven.
And
probably.
Yeah, and because of the control that I expect them to have over their lane matchups in Annex, I think that they should get those games. Like, the thing about Annex is that they'll play towards jungle invade, but it's almost like PvP Stay Host just does like whatever he feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like if they can have good vision around their buffs, then they can just catch him out for free and the game's over. So
I think Stay is actually pretty good. I think it's.
I don't think he's bad, but I think he's kind of like, he doesn't necessarily. I think he's smart, but he doesn't really like pre-plan his pass, and sometimes he's willing to even give up like his own side control to invade the enemy jungle. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Just so I think a lot of their success, for example, was based on just blatant disrespect. Like, if you look at the Tigers game, he goes and he invades the race, and he pushes Peanut out of the jungle, and Kuro is still like completely overextended, and so he just goes and kills Kuro, and it's like, your jungler is gone. Why are you doing that? So, yeah.
Yeah, for this series, I'm predicting a H2K win, but I really want ANX to, at the very least, make a dent and take a game. I'd love to see that. I think it would. If
they do that, H2K will probably just lose.
Yeah, that's true. So does H2K just tilt if they lose a game versus ANX?
I don't think they tilt that bad. I'm probably overstating it, but I do feel like when they start to, they're bad at adapting to drafts. Like, when they think their draft is good or their draft should be good, they just like fixate on it. And even though it's not working in this particular series, or I also do think that there is it's more like, I mean, I asked Vander about it in an interview after they did their 4-0. He said that when we're playing well, like, we all reinforce each other and we just get better and better and better, and it's just like a cycle, but the cycle works the other way if one person starts to play poorly. So that's my concern about H2K, especially against a team like ANX, who are literally like, I don't know. I feel like the confidence they exude could just like knock H2K over on a bad day.
Okay.
So,
but I feel like the only way I can see ANX winning is if they get a good draft and they also manage to get first blood before Jankos does. Because I don't see them doing well if they fall behind early and lose lanes, because I actually don't think they play very well from behind.
It's fair. I don't think they play very methodically at all either.
Yeah. I think that HTK should win. Like, stylistically, they're a good fit. Like, they play very bottom focus, which reduces Liquid's rim potential. And we've seen now that, like, we're kind of moving away from, like, the Lucians and the stuff that we saw in the group stage, and we're seeing much more of the, we're even moving away a bit from the playmaking melee supports, and everyone's kind of really all-inning. They're kind of doubling down on the pushing range supports now. So, which, in one hand, like, kind of does fit Liquid. He's very famous for his, like, brand that is Bard, these champions that people are talking about that he's, like, really good at. And I would expect him to pick up the Zyra. It fits his style. So I think for me, it's but this fits how HDK wants to play, and it fits what kind of a strategy they want to run to stop ANX really doing anything, And in terms of, like, I think the mid and the top lane they're just overpowered skill differences. I think Ryu is a much better player than Kira. I think Odoamne is a much better player than Smurf. And I think the only matchup that's going to be really close is Stayhurst versus Jankos. And I think that's primarily down to Jankos' inconsistency. I don't think Jankos is a bad player at all. I think Jankos, in terms of his peak performance, is one of the best junglers at the tournament. But, at the same time, it's like, well, they did show up in week 2. That's like 4 best of 1s is not enough for me to convince me that you have fixed the issues that have plagued you for 2 years as a jungler. Like, Jankos has been the same guy for 2 years.
I don't know. Jankos for me is actually not as much of a concern. I think that the thing that the adjustment H2K made was they started giving Jankos more lane farm. And part of the issue with Jankos is that if he couldn't, like, get those ridiculous ganks and snowball, like, I think Jankos' attitude towards the jungle changed slightly with the meta finally. Like, I think over a long period of time, Jankos was just very all or nothing, right? He would gank a lane, and if it went well, that's awesome. He'd snowball out of control, and if not, then he wouldn't necessarily, like, even farm, and he'd just fall behind. Now I think there's much more emphasis making sure Jankos stays relevant throughout the game.
I mean, sure, we've seen that in, like, the second week of group stages, but what I'm saying is
we saw it in the first week. We saw it in the latter stages of playoffs. Like, this is something we've seen for a while. Yeah.
I'm not.
I mean, if you look at his pathing, I've pathed his games, dude. Like, if you go to the 3rd place game, like, there's the 3rd place matches, there are points where Ryu deliberately backs to give Jankos farm. And then, like, you can see that also in the first week. Like, if there weren't problems with their early game in their first week, the problem was, like, their shot calling. It wasn't Jankos. Like, Jankos, I think, is actually... I'm worried about Jankos, but not for reasons like him being super inconsistent as an early game jungler. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the big concern I have is that, I mean, like, I trust that what you're saying is true, but based on what I saw was that there were some times where there were some games, and I don't remember if it was in playoffs or if it was in the...
It was probably in the semifinal.
Yeah, I don't. All I remember is in the post regular season, there was still a lot of games where Jankos was showing, like, there were times where they would just, like, not do anything for, like, the whole game, and Jankos would just be kind of running around, like, not doing anything. And, like, that for me, it's like, I'm gonna need to see more than what I've seen to be 100% convinced, because you have to remember as well, we've only seen 1 best of 5 or 2 best of 5s since the semis.
From HTK?
Yeah.
Since the semis? One.
We've seen one.
UOL.
Yeah. And, there's always that, like...
No, they didn't. I mean, they played... Yeah, one UOL, yeah.
So, while they have shown improvements, and I do think that they should be able to take the game, and they can take the game, it's like, you need to show in a best of series for me to really kind of be like, yeah, okay, you've got this now. Like, I trust that you go, like, I can put my faith in you. And
no, I agree that you have to show in a best of series, but it's not Jankos. I mean, it's Jankos, but it's not like how he plays his early game. Is my point. Like, I think that if they start to lose games, like the team itself will just kind of unravel a little, but I don't think it necessarily has to do with like Jankos as an individual being super inconsistent, if that makes sense.
It's also, like, for me, it's about how Jankos, because one of the big improvements they made is Jankos' synergy with Ryu, and I think it's really unlocking Ryu as well, because Ryu's been one of the major playmakers for this team. So it will just come down to, like, if he goes back to, like, his old bad habits for me. I mean, I don't think he will. I do think that they fix their issues, and I do kind of want to put a bit of faith in there, but it's like, I'm not going to double down and be like, yeah, 100% HSK is just going to smash the Series 3-0. I think they should. I think it's, like, most likely they will, but I think that, there's that lingering concern for me.
They still have problems. Like, I'm not saying they don't have problems. They have serious problems, especially like late game. In terms of if they want to apply pressure on multiple sides, I think that's an issue. Yeah, they have problems, and if like Ryu will have non-factor games still also.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that I think like the problems with Jankos' style and the way he coordinates with his lanes have been improved a lot, and I don't expect those to be the reasons that they lose.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. So, is there anything else on this series that anyone else wants to bring up? Nope. Okay, so I think we've actually gone for a lot longer than we expected to, so I think we're going to call it here. So thanks very much for coming on, Kelsey. It's been a pleasure having you as always. It's been an interesting discussion. So you're following the whole world stream for right till the end, right? You're there till the finals?
Yeah, I'm not going to be in LA, but I'll be in New York.
Okay, cool. Okay. So we can expect to see all of your stuff continuing, like interviews and stuff.
Yes.
Hopefully. And where can we find this good stuff?
ScoreEsports.com. Or download our app on Google Play and Android.
That's what
I have to say, like, I do use the Score Esports if, like, I'm traveling or, I'm, like, traveling either by car or by plane to just check the scores because it's really convenient to check there. You can pay me after the show. Just PayPal me, Kelsey.
Typical Nasser being a shill. Yeah.
I guess Shaka, you can do your shout-outs.
Yeah. Well, you can find my stuff on LOLking. I actually released a really big piece on ANX today. It's like 2K words long. It was written by Tankatsu, she works for Gambit. And yeah, she wrote a historical piece on ANX and how they got to where they are. So all their mishaps with different teams and all the history behind ANX because they used to be hard random before. And yeah, it's a pretty interesting piece if you want to learn more about the CIS region. So yeah, go check that out for sure.
Sure. And NASA. Say goodbye, NASA. What can we expect from you?
Basically memes on Twitter. That's about it for now.
For now.
All right. Okay. So I think that's it from us. Thanks for watching. I've been your host. You can find me on Twitter as well. Usual place. Yeah, I think that's it. We're going to end it here. So thanks everyone for watching and enjoy the rest of Worlds.
See ya.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you. Bye.